The widow who saved the wolves. A woman scorned by society pulls two heirs from a flood, shelters a dying lord, and becomes the most dangerous thing his enemies never saw coming. If you want to see how a desperate choice in freezing water rewrites the rules of power, stay until the end. Drop a like and tell me what city you're watching from. The river came like an answer to a question no one wanted to ask. Eliza Rowan stood on the ridge above Thornfield Valley with mud caking her boots and the kind of exhaustion that made your bones feel like they were made of wet rope. The rain hadn't stopped in 4 days. The sky was the color of old bruises, low and swollen, and the wind carried that sharp metallic smell that meant the moorland was drowning. Below her, the Blackwater River was eating Yorkshire alive. It wasn't a river anymore. It was a beast, brown and frothing, wide as a town square, chewing through fence lines and stone walls like they were made of paper. The old stone bridge, the only bridge for 20 miles, was already half gone. She watched a section of the parapet crack and tumble into the current, swallowed without a sound. "Christ," she muttered. No one heard her. No one was close enough to hear anything except the roar of the water. Eliza pulled her shawl tighter, though it did nothing against the cold. Her hands were raw and red, fingers stiff. She'd been out since dawn checking the livestock, hauling the last of the sheep to higher ground, boarding up the barn. The cottage was secure, small mercies, but the valley was lost. Anyone with sense had already left for the hills or the church in Upperby. Anyone with sense. Eliza didn't have sense. She had a dead husband, a burned reputation, and a stubborn streak that made the local women cross themselves when she walked past. She'd been a widow for 3 years. Thomas Rowan had been a drunkard, a gambler, and toward the end, mean in the way that small men get when they realize the world won't bend for them. He'd died in a tavern fight over cards, bleeding out in the mud behind the King's Arms, while Eliza was home darning his socks. The town had blamed her anyway. A wife should know. A wife should control her husband. A wife who couldn't was either complicit or cursed. Eliza figured she was neither, just unlucky. The cottage had been Thomas's father's, passed down through a line of Rowans who'd worked the same rocky soil for generations. When Thomas died, his cousins had come sniffing around, expecting her to pack up and leave. She'd met them at the door with her husband's shotgun and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This is my house now," she'd said. "You can try to take it, but one of you won't walk away." They hadn't tried. The town had talked about that too. Unnatural, they said. A woman living alone. A woman with a gun and no fear of using it. A woman who didn't lower her eyes or soften her voice or apologize for taking up space. Eliza had stopped going to church, stopped going to market unless she had to. She worked her small plot of land, kept chickens, traded eggs and vegetables with the few people who'd still deal with her. She didn't need friends, didn't want pity, didn't owe anyone a damn thing. It was a hard life, but it was hers, and now the river was trying to take that too. She turned to head back when she saw it. A carriage. It came careening down the old toll road like a shot, horses wild-eyed and frothing, driver barely holding the reins. The wheels skidded in the mud, fishtailing, the whole rig tilting dangerously to one side. Eliza's stomach dropped. "No," she said aloud. "Don't." They were heading straight for the bridge. She started running. Her boots slipped in the muck, her skirts tangling around her legs, but she didn't stop. She could see it all unfolding in horrible slow motion. The horses hitting the bridge, the driver yanking too hard on the reins, the carriage lurching sideways. One wheel went over the edge. Then the whole thing flipped. The sound was sickening, wood splintering, horses screaming, the crack of something heavy hitting stone. The carriage tumbled once, twice, and then the current took it. The river grabbed it like a fist and dragged it under. Eliza hit the riverbank at a dead sprint. The water was chaos. Debris everywhere, shattered wood, leather straps, a trunk bobbing and spinning. One of the horses was still alive, thrashing in the current, eyes rolling white with terror. The other was already gone, swept downstream with the driver still tangled in the reins. She scanned frantically, looking for survivors, for movement, for anything. There. A man. Face down in the water, one arm hooked over a piece of the carriage door, dragging him downstream. He wasn't moving. And then she heard it. A baby crying. Her head snapped to the left. 20 feet out, caught in a tangle of reeds and broken wheel spokes, was a wicker basket. It was half submerged, rocking violently in the current. Inside, 2 infants. One was wailing, the other silent and pale. Eliza didn't think. She kicked off her boots and dove. The cold hit her like a fist to the chest. Her lungs seized. The current grabbed her immediately, trying to spin her around, drag her under. She fought it, kicking hard, aiming for the basket. Her arms burned. Her legs were lead. The water was filthy, thick with silt, choking. The current was stronger than she'd expected. It pulled at her skirts, her hair, trying to drag her down. She couldn't see anything through the murky water, couldn't hear anything but the roar in her ears. Her chest was screaming for air. She broke the surface, gasping, and the basket was right there. Her fingers closed around the edge and she yanked it toward her, looping one arm through the handle. The crying baby was thrashing, its face red and furious. The other one wasn't breathing. No time. She looked back toward the bank, too far. The current was too strong. She'd never make it with the basket and her waterlogged skirts dragging her down. Then she saw the man again. He was closer now, still clinging to the wreckage, but his grip was slipping. His head lolled. Blood streaked his face, mixing with the brown water. Eliza made a choice. She kicked toward him, dragging the basket with one arm, her other hand clawing through the water. Her shoulder screamed. Her lungs were on fire. Every stroke felt like lifting stones. The cold was seeping into her bones, making her movements sluggish, clumsy. She reached him just as his hand let go. She grabbed his coat. He was heavy, dead weight. His head rolled back and she saw his face for the first time, sharp features, pale as death, a gash across his temple bleeding freely. He wasn't conscious, wasn't helping. His body was limp, pulling her down. "Don't you dare," she hissed through gritted teeth. "Don't you fucking dare." She hooked her arm under his chin and kicked backward, pulling him and the basket toward the bank. The current fought her every inch. Her muscles were jelly, her vision blurred. She couldn't feel her legs anymore. The basket kept trying to slip from her grip, and the man's weight was dragging her under. She went down once. Water filled her mouth, her nose. She kicked hard, breaking the surface, coughing and sputtering. The basket was still there. The man was still there. She hadn't lost them. She kept swimming. Her feet hit something solid, a submerged root. She used it to push off, driving herself and her cargo toward the shallows. Her knees hit mud. She crawled, dragging the man and the basket up onto the bank, her arms shaking, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She made it 3 feet before she collapsed face first into the grass. For a long moment, she just lay there, gasping, shaking, tasting blood and river water. Rain hammered down on her back. Her whole body was trembling, muscles twitching with exhaustion. She wanted to stay down, wanted to close her eyes and let the darkness take her. Then the baby started crying again. Eliza forced herself up. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely open the basket, but she managed. She pulled out the wailing infant first, a boy, red-faced and furious, very much alive. She set him down on the grass, then reached for the other one. This one was smaller, limp. His lips were blue. "No," Eliza said. "No, no, no." She flipped him over, pressed her fingers to his tiny chest, felt for a heartbeat. It was there. Faint. Too faint. His skin was cold, clammy. He wasn't breathing. She tilted his head back, covered his nose and mouth with her own, and breathed. Once. Twice. Nothing. She pressed on his chest, tiny compressions, then breathed again. The baby coughed. Water came up. He gasped, choked, then wailed, thin and reedy, but alive. Eliza sat back on her heels, shaking, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the rain. "There you go," she whispered. "There you go." She looked over at the man. He was sprawled on his back, soaked and bleeding, chest barely moving. She crawled over to him, pressed her fingers to his throat. Pulse. Weak, thready, but there. He had a face that belonged on a coin. High cheekbones, strong jaw, dark hair plastered to his skull. His clothes were fine, too fine for a farmer or a trader. Wool coat, tailored waistcoat, leather boots that cost more than everything Eliza owned put together. And the wounds. Eliza pulled his coat open. Beneath it, his shirt was shredded, not from the crash, from something else. Long, deliberate cuts across his ribs and side. defensive wounds on his forearms where he'd tried to block the blade, and a deep puncture near his collarbone that was still bleeding sluggishly, the blood darker than it should be. Someone had tried to kill him. Not the river, not the crash. Someone had put a knife in him over and over, with intent. Eliza sat back, her mind racing. This wasn't an accident. The carriage, the river, the babies. It wasn't bad luck or a panicked driver. This was something else. Something planned. Someone had attacked this man and he'd run. The carriage had been his escape, and the storm had finished what his attackers had started. Or tried to. She looked down at the man's face again. He was unconscious, defenseless, and if she left him here, he'd be dead by morning. The cold alone would kill him. The wounds would finish the job if infection didn't get there first. She should leave him, walk away. Take the babies, yes. They were innocent, but the man? He was trouble. The kind of trouble that came with knives and blood and people who didn't stop until the job was done. She didn't owe him anything, didn't owe anyone anything. But the babies were still crying, and the storm was getting worse, and the man's pulse was fading under her fingers. And Eliza Rowan had never been good at doing the smart thing. God damn it, she muttered. She grabbed the man under the arms and started dragging him toward the cottage. Woke. It took her an hour to get them all inside. The man first, hauled through the mud and up the hill, dead weight and slippery. She had to stop twice to rest, her arms screaming, her back threatening to give out. He was tall, solid muscle under the fine clothes, and every inch was a fight. She left him on the kitchen floor while she went back for the babies. They were screaming by then, cold and terrified, and she wrapped them in her shawl and carried them both at once, tucking them against her chest as she stumbled up the path. Her legs were shaking, her vision kept blurring at the edges. She'd pushed herself too far and her body was letting her know. By the time she got the door bolted and the fire lit, she was shaking so hard she could barely hold the poker. The cottage was small, one room, a loft above where she stored dried herbs and extra blankets, a stone hearth that dominated one wall, a table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner, shelves lined with jars of preserves, bundles of dried lavender, a few precious books wrapped in oilcloth. It smelled like peat smoke and damp wool, and the wind rattled the shutters, but it was warm, it was dry, it was hers. Eliza set the babies down on the bed, stripping off their soaked clothes with fumbling fingers. They were identical, dark hair, pale skin, maybe 6 months old. Brothers, she guessed. They stared up at her with wide, dark eyes, still whimpering, their little bodies shivering. "You're all right," she told them, her voice hoarse. "You're all right now." She wrapped them in every blanket she had, tucking them close together so their body heat would keep them warm. One of them grabbed her finger, holding tight, and something in her chest cracked. Then she turned to the man. He was still unconscious, pale as a ghost, blood pooling beneath him on the stone floor. His breathing was shallow, labored. Eliza knelt down, her hands already moving, pulling off his coat and waistcoat, cutting away his ruined shirt with her sewing scissors. The wounds were worse than she'd thought. Deep, precise, the kind of cuts you got from someone who knew what they were doing with a blade. There were 5 major wounds, the puncture near his collarbone, 2 slashes across his ribs, a deep cut along his left forearm, and another puncture in his side just below the ribs that made her stomach turn. That one had been aimed at his kidney. Whoever had done this had been trying to make him suffer. She worked fast, boiled water, cleaned the wounds with whiskey and lye soap, wincing at the way the alcohol foamed pink in the cuts, stitched the worst of them with thread meant for mending socks, her hands steady despite the tremor in her chest. She'd done this before, too many times. Her husband had come home bleeding more than once, back when he was still coming home at all. The man didn't wake, didn't even flinch when the needle went in. That worried her more than the wounds. He should be feeling this, should be screaming. Eliza wrapped his ribs in strips of torn linen, binding them tight to keep the stitches from tearing. She packed the puncture wounds with honey, an old trick her mother had taught her, and covered them with clean cloth. Then she dragged him closer to the fire, her muscles burning with the effort, and covered him with a quilt. She tucked a rolled blanket under his head, checked his pulse again, still there, still weak, and sat back on her heels, staring down at him. "Who the hell are you?" she muttered. He didn't answer. Outside, the storm howled. The river roared. The world was ending, slow and inevitable, and Eliza Rowan had just saved 3 lives she didn't know and couldn't afford to keep. She looked over at the babies. They'd stopped crying. They were huddled together under the blankets, watching her with those big, solemn eyes. One of them yawned, tiny fist rubbing at his face. "Well," she said, "I suppose you're stuck with me." The other one made a small cooing sound. Eliza laughed. It came out sharp and ragged, edging toward hysteria, but she couldn't stop it. She pressed her hands to her face, feeling the tremor in her fingers, the exhaustion dragging at her bones. She stood, went to the cupboard, and pulled out a bottle of whiskey. She poured herself 2 fingers, drank it in one swallow, and poured another. The burn felt good, grounding. Then she sat down at the table and waited for the stranger to wake up. He didn't wake for 2 days. Fever set in almost immediately. His skin burned to the touch, and he thrashed in his sleep, muttering words Eliza couldn't make out. Sometimes it was names, Edward, Catherine, father. Sometimes it was just sounds, desperate and broken. She kept him cool with wet cloths, forced water down his throat when she could, and changed his bandages twice a day. The wounds were clean, no infection yet, thank God, but the fever didn't break. It climbed higher, hotter, until she could feel the heat radiating off him from a foot away. His pulse raced, his breathing turned ragged. On the second night, she thought he was going to die. He stopped thrashing around midnight, just went still and quiet, his breathing so shallow she had to press her ear to his chest to hear it. His lips were cracked and bleeding. His skin had gone from burning to clammy. Eliza sat beside him, one hand on his chest, feeling the faint flutter of his heartbeat under her palm. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't you dare. I didn't drag you out of that river for nothing." He didn't respond. She stayed there all night, changing the cloths, dribbling water into his mouth, checking his pulse every few minutes. The babies woke twice, crying for food, and she fed them with one hand while keeping the other on the man's chest. By dawn, she was swaying with exhaustion, and then his eyes opened. Just for a second, a flicker of gray, unfocused, and confused before they closed again. But it was enough. Eliza exhaled slowly, something unknotting in her chest. "There you are," she whispered. The babies were easier. They cried when they were hungry, slept when they were fed, and stared at her like she was the only thing holding the world together. She had no milk, but she boiled oats into a thin gruel and fed it to them with a spoon, drop by drop, until they stopped fussing. It was slow, tedious work, but they took to it. They were fighters, these two. Stubborn little things. She named them in her head, just to keep them straight. The louder one, the one who'd been crying in the basket, she called Storm. The quiet one, the one who'd stopped breathing, she called River. It was morbid, maybe, but it fit. They didn't look like brothers. Not exactly. Storm had a rounder face, darker eyes. River's features were sharper, more delicate. But they moved the same way, made the same sounds. Twins, probably. Or close enough. Eliza wondered who their mother was. If she'd been in the carriage, if she was dead now, drowned in the river, or lying in some ditch with a knife in her back. She tried not to think about it too much. On the 3rd day, the man's fever finally broke. Eliza woke to the sound of movement. Not thrashing, deliberate movement. She sat up fast, her heart pounding, reaching for the knife she kept under her pillow. The man was sitting up. He was pale, shaking, one hand pressed to his ribs, but he was awake. His eyes were open, sharp, and focused in a way that made her stomach twist. He looked around the cottage, taking in the fire, the shelves, the babies asleep in the bed, and then his gaze landed on her. "Where am I?" His voice was rough, raw, like he'd been screaming. "My home," Eliza said carefully. She kept the knife low, not threatening, but visible. "You're safe." Safe. He said it like the word tasted wrong. He looked down at himself, at the bandages, the blankets, the firelight flickering across his bare chest. Then he looked back at her. "Who are you?" "Eliza Rowan, I pulled you out of the river." His eyes narrowed. "The boys?" "Alive, asleep." He exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging. Relief, or something close to it. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, they were wet. "Thank you," he said quietly. Eliza didn't know what to say to that. She nodded. Then he tried to stand, Don't. Eliza started, but it was too late. His legs buckled. He went down hard, catching himself on the edge of the table, his face twisting in pain. Eliza dropped the knife and moved to help him, but he jerked away. Don't touch me. She froze. He was breathing hard, one hand pressed to his ribs, the other gripping the table like it was the only thing keeping him upright. His jaw was set, his eyes dark with something that looked a lot like fear. You're hurt, Eliza said carefully. You need to lie down. I need to leave. You'll die if you leave. I'll die if I stay. That stopped her cold. They stared at each other across the dim room, the fire crackling softly between them. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, but the wind still howled through the eaves. Who's coming for you? Eliza asked quietly. The man's face went very still. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me. Her voice was sharper than she meant it to be. I've seen knife wounds before. Those didn't come from a carriage crash. Someone tried to kill you, and if you brought that trouble to my door, I deserve to know. He didn't answer, just stared at her with those gray eyes, calculating, weighing his options. Eliza took a step closer. I saved your life. I stitched you back together. I kept you alive through the fever. So either you tell me what's coming or you get the hell out of my house and take your chances with the river. Your choice. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't speak, just looked at her like he was trying to decide if she was worth the risk. Then he sank down into the chair, his head dropping into his hands. My name, he said quietly, is Victor Hale, and you just made the worst mistake of your life. Eliza crossed her arms. Why? Victor looked up at her. His face was haggard, gray with exhaustion and pain, but his eyes were steady. Because the men who did this to me won't stop until I'm dead. And now that you've seen my face, now that you know the boys exist, they'll come for you too. What men? My family. Eliza blinked. Your family tried to kill you? Not all of them, just the ones who stand to inherit if I die. He laughed, bitter and broken. Which is most of them. Inherit what? Victor met her eyes. Everything. Dad. He told her the rest over the next hour, his voice low and halting, stopping every few minutes to catch his breath or press a hand to his ribs. Victor Hale wasn't just a nobleman. He was the eldest son of Lord Edmund Hale, one of the wealthiest landowners in the north, estates in 3 counties, mines, mills, enough money to buy a small country if he wanted, and enough enemies to fill a graveyard. My father's been dying for 2 years, Victor said. Cancer. The physicians give him 6 months, maybe less. Everyone knows it. Everyone's been circling like vultures, waiting for him to drop. And you're the heir. I was. He touched the bandage on his ribs. My uncle, my father's younger brother, decided he'd rather not wait. He has sons of his own. If I die before my father does, the title and the estates pass to him. So he sent men to kill you. Not just men, family, cousins, people I've known my whole life. Victor's voice cracked. They cornered me on the road 3 days ago, dragged me into the woods. I fought back, but there were too many of them. How did you get away? I didn't. Not really. He gestured vaguely toward the door. The driver, Henry, he was loyal. He'd been with my family since I was a boy. When he saw what was happening, he drove the carriage straight through them. Took a blade in the chest doing it, but he got me out. Eliza thought of the man she'd seen tangled in the rain, swept downstream. He's dead. I know. There was a long silence. And the boys? Eliza asked. Victor looked over at the bed where the twins were sleeping. His face softened, just a fraction. My brother's sons. Edward. He was the middle child. He married for love, which my father never forgave him for. A merchant's daughter. No title, no connections. They had the boys a year ago. He paused. Someone poisoned them 6 months later. Both of them. Edward and his wife. Eliza felt something cold settle in her stomach. Who? I don't know. Could have been my uncle. Could have been someone else. There are a lot of people who benefit from fewer Hales in the world. Victor's jaw tightened. I've been caring for the boys ever since, trying to keep them safe. But after the attack, I knew I couldn't stay in London,
So I took them and ran. And your uncle's men followed. They always do. Eliza sat down across from him, her mind racing. So what now? You can't run forever. Not with 2 babies and wounds like that. I know. Then what's your plan? Victor looked at her, and for the first time she saw the desperation in his eyes, the fear he'd been holding back. I don't have one, he said quietly. I was hoping I'd figure something out before they found me, but then the storm came, and the bridge. He stopped. I thought we were all going to die. You almost did. Maybe I should have. Eliza leaned forward. Listen to me. I don't know you. I don't know your family or your politics or any of this noble bullshit, but I know one thing. You don't get to give up. Not after what I went through to pull you out of that river. Victor stared at her. Those boys need you, Eliza continued. They need someone who'll fight for them, someone who won't roll over and die just because the odds are bad. So you're going to sit here, you're going to heal, and you're going to figure out how to stay alive. Understand? He didn't answer right away. Just looked at her with something that might have been surprise or gratitude or both. Why do you care? He asked finally. Eliza stood, walking over to the fire. She stared into the flames, her arms crossed. I don't, she said, but I'm not going to watch 2 babies die because their uncle's a coward. Behind her, Victor was quiet. Then, softly, You're very blunt. It's a character flaw. I like it. Eliza turned to look at him. He was smiling, just barely, a thin curve of his mouth that didn't quite reach his eyes. Get some rest, she said. We'll figure out the rest in the morning. Victor nodded. He started to stand, then thought better of it and stayed in the chair. Eliza? What? Thank you for not leaving me in the river. She didn't answer, just turned back to the fire and listened to the wind howl through the eaves. Outside, the storm was finally dying. But inside, in the small cottage on the edge of the flooded valley, something else was beginning. Something that would change everything. Victor's fever came back on the 4th night. Eliza woke to the sound of him gasping, thrashing against the blankets she'd piled on him. She was on her feet before she was fully awake, stumbling across the dark cottage with her heart hammering. His skin was burning again, worse than before. She could feel the heat radiating off him when she pressed her hand to his forehead. No, 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 she muttered, already moving. Water, clean cloths, the last of the willow bark tea she'd been rationing. Victor's eyes were open but unfocused, staring at something she couldn't see. His lips moved, forming words that made no sense. Edward, he mumbled. Edward, run. They're coming. He jerked violently, nearly rolling off the makeshift pallet she'd made for him near the fire. Eliza caught him, her hands on his shoulders, holding him down. You're safe, she said firmly. You're in my house. No one's coming. But even as she said it, she wasn't sure she believed it. She worked through the night, changing his bandages, forcing water between his cracked lips, keeping the fire stoked. The babies woke twice, hungry and fussing, and she fed them one-handed while keeping the other on Victor's chest, counting his heartbeats. By dawn, she was so exhausted she could barely stand, and Victor was still burning. The wound in his side, the deep puncture below his ribs, had gone bad. She'd seen it coming, had tried to stay ahead of it, but infection was like that. Sneaky. Patient. It waited until you let your guard down, and then it struck. The skin around the wound was hot and swollen, angry red spreading outward like fingers. When she peeled back the bandage, pus oozed out, thick and yellow-green. Eliza's stomach turned, but she didn't flinch. She'd seen worse. Done worse. She heated her sewing needle in the fire until it glowed red, then used it to reopen the wound. Victor screamed, a raw animal sound that made the babies start crying, but she didn't stop. She pressed on the inflamed tissue, draining the infection, washing it out with whiskey that probably hurt worse than the knife had. Victor passed out halfway through. Small mercies. When it was done, she packed the wound with fresh honey and wrapped it tight. Then she sat back on her heels, shaking, and stared at the mess on the floor. Blood, pus, whiskey, the sharp smell of infection mixing with wood smoke. You better live through this, she said to Victor's unconscious form. I didn't go through all that for nothing. He didn't answer. The babies were still crying. Eliza dragged herself over to the bed, picked them both up,
and held them against her chest. They settled almost immediately, making small snuffling sounds, their tiny fists curling into her shirt. She sat there on the edge of the bed, rocking them gently, and tried not to think about what would happen if Victor died. 3 more mouths she couldn't afford to feed. 3 more reasons for the town to turn on her. 3 more lives depending on her to keep them alive. She was so tired. But the babies needed her. Victor needed her. And Eliza Rowan had never been good at walking away from things that needed her, even when she should. Especially when she should. Victor woke 2 days later. This time, his eyes were clear, focused. He looked around the cottage slowly, taking in the details. The herbs hanging from the rafters, the shotgun propped in the corner, the babies sleeping in a nest of blankets on the bed. Then his gaze found Eliza. She was at the table, mending one of his shirts. The fabric was ruined, shredded beyond any real repair, but she was trying anyway. Waste not, want not. "You're awake," she said without looking up. "How long?" "6 days since I pulled you out. You've been in and out of fever for most of it." Victor tried to sit up, failed, tried again, slower this time, and managed to prop himself against the wall. He looked down at his bandaged torso, touched the wrapping gingerly. "You drained the infection." "Had to. You were going septic." "That must have been unpleasant." "You screamed a lot." "I apologize." Eliza finally looked up, one eyebrow raised. "You apologize for screaming while I dug infected tissue out of your side with a hot needle?" "It seemed rude not to warn you." Despite herself, Eliza felt her mouth twitch. "You were unconscious. You get a pass." Victor leaned his head back against the wall, closing his eyes. "How are the boys?" "Alive, healthy, loud." She set down the shirt. "They're eating well, sleeping through most of the night now." "Good." He was quiet for a moment. "What have you been feeding them?" "Oat gruel, mashed turnip, a bit of egg yolk when I can spare it." She shrugged. "It's not ideal, but it's keeping them going." "And you? What are you eating?" Eliza didn't answer. Victor opened his eyes, looking at her directly. "You're feeding them your rations, aren't you?" "I'm fine." "You're lying." "I'm fine," she repeated, sharper this time. "Don't worry about me. Worry about healing." Victor's jaw tightened, but he didn't push. Smart man. They sat in silence for a while. The only sound, the crackle of the fire and the soft breathing of the sleeping babies. Finally, Victor spoke. "The river. Is it still flooded?" "Yes. Worse, if anything. The bridge is completely gone. There's no way in or out of the valley until the water recedes." "How long?" "Could be days. Could be weeks. Depends on the weather." Victor's face went pale. "Weeks. You got somewhere to be?" "I need to send word to London, to my solicitor, to people I trust." He pushed himself upright, wincing. "If my uncle thinks I'm dead, he'll move fast. Start consolidating power, shifting assets. By the time I resurface, there won't be anything left to fight for." "And if he thinks you're alive?" "Then he'll send more men to finish the job." Eliza stood, crossing to the window. She pulled back the shutter, looking out at the gray landscape. The valley was a lake. Trees stood half submerged, their branches reaching up like hands. The sky was low and threatening, more rain coming. "So you're damned either way," she said. "Yes." "Then why does it matter if you send word or not?" Victor was quiet. Then, "Because I need them to know the boys are alive." Eliza turned to look at him. "Why?" "Because they're heirs. Edward's sons. If something happens to me, they're next in line. My uncle knows that. If he finds out they survived the carriage crash, he'll come for them too." "Then maybe don't tell anyone they're alive." "I can't do that." "Why not?" "Because they're family," Victor said, his voice tight. "They have a right to their inheritance, to their name. I can't just hide them, pretend they don't exist." "You can if it keeps them alive." "That's not living, that's surviving. There's a difference." Eliza laughed, sharp and bitter. "Is there? Because from where I'm standing, surviving seems like the only thing that matters." Victor stared at her. "You don't mean that, don't I?" She crossed her arms. "You want to know what I've learned in the last 3 years? People with names and titles and inheritance, they don't survive. They get comfortable. They get soft. And when the world turns on them, they die screaming, wondering why their money didn't save them. That's a bleak view. It's an honest view. And what about love, loyalty, family? Eliza's face went hard. Those things get you killed even faster. Victor opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Who hurt you? He asked quietly. Everyone. She turned back to the window. Now shut up and rest. You're still half dead, and I'm not wasting any more time keeping you alive if you're just going to do something stupid. Behind her, Victor was silent, but she could feel his eyes on her, watching, weighing, trying to figure her out. Good luck with that, she thought. She'd given up trying to figure herself out years ago. The first visitor came 3 days later. Eliza was outside hauling water from the well when she heard the horse. She froze, her hand going instinctively to the knife at her belt. A rider was picking his way carefully up the muddy path, his horse struggling through the slop. He was young, maybe 20, with a thin face and nervous hands. He wore a constable's coat, but it hung loose on him, like it had been made for someone bigger. Eliza set down the bucket and waited. The rider pulled up a few feet away, his horse stamping and blowing. He looked at Eliza, then at the cottage, then back at Eliza. Mrs. Rowan? Miss, Eliza corrected. Widow. Right. Sorry. He cleared his throat. I'm Deputy Marsh from Upperby. The magistrate sent me to check on folks in the valley, make sure everyone got out before the flood. I'm fine. I can see that. His eyes flicked to the cottage again. Anyone else with you? Eliza's stomach tightened, but her face stayed neutral. No? You sure? We heard reports of a carriage going into the river a few days back. Driver and passengers presumed dead, but we thought we'd check. Haven't seen any carriage. Marsh's eyes narrowed. You're pretty far from the main road. Must have missed all the excitement. Must have. They stared at each other for a long moment. Eliza didn't blink. Finally, Marsh shifted in his saddle. Well, if you do see anything, wreckage, bodies, survivors, you let us know, yeah? Of course. He nodded, started to turn his horse, then paused. Folks in town are talking, saying you've been laying low, not coming in for market. Haven't had anything to trade. That's not what I heard. I heard you've been holed up here for over a week, not answering when people knock. Eliza's hand tightened on the knife. I don't recall anyone knocking. Reverend Cole came by, twice. I must have been out. Both times? I'm a busy woman, Deputy. Marsh's jaw tightened. People are worried, Mrs. Rowan. You're out here alone. No family. No husband. This flood. It's dangerous. If something happened to you, no one would know. I can take care of myself. Can you? He leaned forward slightly. Because it seems to me like you're hiding something, and that makes people nervous. Eliza took a step forward, her voice dropping low. You want to know what I'm hiding, Deputy? I'm hiding the fact that I don't give a damn what people in town think about me. I'm hiding the fact that I'd rather be alone out here than surrounded by gossips and hypocrites who cross themselves every time I walk by. And I'm hiding the fact that if you or anyone else comes onto my property uninvited again, I'll greet you with a shotgun instead of words. Is that clear enough for you? Marsh's face went pale. He straightened in his saddle, his hand moving toward his belt, toward the pistol there. You threatening an officer of the law? I'm telling you to leave, now. For a moment, she thought he might actually draw the pistol. His hand hovered over it, his jaw working, his eyes hard. Then he pulled his hand back. This isn't over, he said quietly. People are watching you, Mrs. Rowan, and sooner or later, they're going to want answers. Tell them I don't have any. Marsh jerked his horse around and kicked it into a trot, mud spraying up from its hooves. Eliza watched him disappear down the path, her heart hammering in her chest. When he was out of sight, she turned and ran back to the cottage. Victor was standing by the window, one hand pressed to his side, the other holding the shotgun. I heard, he said. We have a problem. I know. Eliza locked the door, her hands shaking. They're looking for you, for the carriage. If they come back with more men, if they search the cottage, they'll find me. And the boys. Victor set the shotgun down carefully. Then we need to move. Move where? The valley's flooded. There's nowhere to go. There has to be somewhere. A barn, a cave. somewhere they wouldn't think to look. Eliza paced, her mind racing. There's an old shepherd's hut up in the hills, 2 miles north. It's half collapsed, but it's still standing. No one's used it in years. Can we get there without being seen? Maybe, if we go at night, through the woods. Victor looked down at his bandaged torso. I can walk. Can you walk 2 miles uphill in the dark while carrying a baby? I'll manage. You'll collapse. Then you'll drag me the rest of the way. You're good at that. Despite everything, Eliza almost smiled. You're an idiot. So I've been told. One of the babies started crying. Victor moved toward the bed, his gait stiff and uneven, and picked up the fussing infant. Storm, by the sound of it. He held the baby against his chest, swaying slightly, and Storm settled almost immediately. Eliza watched them, something tight and complicated twisting in her chest. We leave tonight, she said. As soon as it's full dark. Pack light. Only what we can carry. Victor nodded. What about supplies? I'll bring what I can. Food, blankets, the medical kit. It won't be much, but it'll keep us going for a few days. And after that? Eliza didn't answer. She didn't have an answer. Victor looked at her over the baby's head, his gray eyes steady. This isn't your fight, Eliza. You could tell them where I am. Turn me in. Collect whatever reward my uncle's offering. You'd be set for life. Is that what you think I'd do? I don't know what you'd do. I barely know you. Eliza crossed to the bed and picked up River, who was starting to stir. She cradled him carefully, her thumb stroking his soft cheek. I'm not turning you in, she said quietly. But not because I care about your title or your money or your family drama. I'm doing this because those babies deserve a chance. And because I'm not letting some corrupt bastard and his hired killers win. Victor studied her face. You're very certain about that. I'm certain about very little, Victor, but I'm certain about this. Yet they stood there in the dim cottage, each holding a baby, the weight of what they were about to do settling over them like a shroud. Finally, Victor spoke. If we do this, if we run, there's no going back. They'll keep hunting us, keep coming. It won't stop until one of us is dead. I know. And you're still willing to risk it? Eliza looked down at River, who had fallen asleep in her arms, his tiny face peaceful. Yes, she said. I am. They left 2 hours after midnight. The rain had started again, a steady drizzle that turned the ground into a slick mess. Eliza led the way, moving carefully through the darkness, a bundle strapped to her back, and Storm tucked against her chest in a makeshift sling. Victor followed, carrying River and the shotgun, his breathing labored but steady. He hadn't complained once, but Eliza could see the pain in the tight line of his jaw, the way he favored his left side. They moved through the woods in silence, their footsteps muffled by wet leaves. The trees loomed around them, black shapes against a blacker sky. Every sound made Eliza's heart jump, a branch cracking, an owl calling, the distant rush of the swollen river. She kept expecting to hear voices, footsteps, the sound of men with torches and dogs closing in. But there was nothing, just the rain and the wind and the weight of the babies against their chests. It took them 3 hours to reach the shepherd's hut. It was worse than Eliza remembered. The roof was half gone, the walls sagging inward, the door hanging off its hinges. Inside it was dark and damp and smelled like rot. But it was shelter, and it was hidden. Eliza set Storm down carefully on a dry patch of floor, then helped Victor lower himself down. He was shaking, his face gray with exhaustion. Stay here, she said. I'll see if I can make this place livable. She worked quickly, clearing debris, patching the worst of the holes in the roof with branches and her spare blanket. It wasn't much, but it would keep the rain out. Mostly. By the time she finished, Victor had built a small fire in the stone hearth, the flames flickering weakly but providing some warmth. The babies were asleep again, curled together in a nest of blankets. Eliza sat down next to Victor, her body aching with exhaustion. We made it, she said. For now. That's all we can ask for. Victor looked at her, his face half shadowed by firelight. Why are you doing this, Eliza? Really? She didn't answer right away. She stared into the fire, watching the flames dance. I had a husband once, she said finally. Thomas. He was a drunk and a fool,
but he was mine. When he died, the town blamed me, said I'd driven him to it, that I was cursed. They wanted me gone, wanted my land, my house, everything I had. She paused, her jaw tightening. I could have left, should have left, but I didn't. Because the moment I walked away, the moment I let them win, that was the moment I stopped being a person and became just another cautionary tale, another woman who couldn't survive on her own. She looked at Victor. So no, this isn't about you or the boys or your uncle. This is about me, about proving that I don't break, that I don't run, that I survive. Victor was quiet for a long moment. You're the stubbornest woman I've ever met, he said finally. Good. Then we're evenly matched. He smiled, a real smile this time, warm and genuine. And for just a moment, in the flickering firelight of a half-collapsed shepherd's hut with 2 sleeping babies and a world full of enemies hunting them, Eliza felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It didn't last. The next morning, they heard the dogs. Eliza was outside gathering water from a nearby stream when the sound reached her. Distant. Echoing through the trees, the unmistakable baying of hounds on a scent. Her blood went cold. She ran back to the hut, water sloshing over the sides of the bucket. Victor was already on his feet, the shotgun in his hands. How many? He asked. I don't know. At least 3. Maybe more. How far? Half a mile. Maybe less. Victor's face went hard. They found the cottage, tracked us. We need to run. With 2 babies and me barely able to walk, we won't make it 100 yards. Eliza's mind raced. Then we fight. Against how many men? With 1 shotgun and a knife? You have a better idea? Victor looked at her, then at the babies, then back at the sound of the dogs getting closer. Yes, he said. I do. He grabbed her arm, his grip tight. Listen to me. You take the boys and run, north toward Upperby. Find the magistrate. Tell him who I am. Show him the boys. He'll protect you. What about you? I'll lead them away, buy you time. You'll die. Probably. No. Eliza jerked her arm free. I'm not leaving you. You don't have a choice. Yes, I do, and I'm choosing to stay. Victor's eyes blazed. You stubborn, foolish woman. We fight together, Eliza said, her voice steel. Or we die together. Your choice. The dogs were getting louder, closer. Victor stared at her, his jaw working, something fierce and desperate in his eyes. Then he handed her the shotgun. Together, he said. Eliza took the shotgun, feeling its weight settle into her hands like an old friend. The dogs were maybe 200 yards out now, their barking sharp and frenzied. Through the trees she could see movement, figures, men on horseback picking their way through the undergrowth. How many shells? Victor asked. 2. That's all? I wasn't planning on fighting a war when I left the cottage. Victor grabbed the knife from her belt, testing its weight. His face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold, but his hands were steady. Then we make them count, he said. Eliza positioned herself at the broken window, the shotgun braced against her shoulder. Victor moved to the door, keeping low, the knife ready. The babies were silent, tucked into their nest of blankets in the corner farthest from the entrance. The first dog burst through the tree line. It was a big brute, all muscle and teeth, foam flecking its jaws. It made straight for the hut, nose to the ground, and Eliza's finger tightened on the trigger. Not yet, Victor hissed. Wait for the handlers. 2 men appeared behind the dog. Then 3 more. Then 2 on horseback, hanging back, watching. 7 total, all of them armed. Swords, pistols, 1 carrying a crossbow. Eliza's stomach dropped. 7 against 2. With 2 babies to protect and Victor barely able to stand. They were going to die here. The first man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running down his left cheek, raised his hand. The dog stopped, circling, still barking but holding position. "Victor Hale!" the man shouted. His voice was rough, gravelly. "We know you're in there. Come out. Make this easy." Victor didn't move, didn't answer. The scarred man waited a beat, then shrugged. "Have it your way."
He gestured, and two of the men started forward. Eliza aimed at the one on the left, tracking his movement through the sight. 50 feet, 40, 30. Now, Victor said. She fired. The shot caught the man in the chest, lifting him off his feet and slamming him backward into the mud. The second man dove for cover, shouting, and suddenly everyone was moving. The dogs lunged forward, snarling. The men spread out, taking positions behind trees and rocks. Eliza broke the shotgun, ejecting the spent shell, loading the second. Her hands were shaking, but she forced them steady. "One shot left," she said. "Make it count." A pistol cracked. The window frame above Eliza's head exploded in splinters. She dropped, rolling away, and came up firing. The second shell took one of the dogs mid-leap, the blast sending it tumbling sideways with a yelp. Then the shotgun was empty, and Eliza was scrambling backward, grabbing for the knife Victor had dropped. "Get the babies," Victor said. He was at the door now, blocking it with his body. "Go out the back. Run." "There is no back. It's a wall." "Then make a hole." Another shot. The bullet punched through the rotten wood of the wall, missing Eliza by inches. She could hear the men shouting to each other, coordinating, closing in. Victor turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw something that made her chest tighten. Resignation. Acceptance. The look of a man who'd already made peace with dying. "No," she said. "Eliza, no." She grabbed the shotgun, flipped it around, holding it like a club. "We're not done yet." The door exploded inward. The scarred man came through first, sword drawn, and Victor met him head-on. Steel clashed against steel. Victor had grabbed a broken piece of iron from the hearth, and they grappled, slamming into the wall. Eliza swung the shotgun at the second man through the door. It connected with his skull with a sickening crack, and he went down hard. A third man rushed her, and she drove the stock into his stomach, doubling him over, then brought it down on the back of his head. But there were too many. A fourth man grabbed her from behind, arms locking around her chest, lifting her off her feet. She thrashed, kicking, trying to break free, but his grip was iron. "Got her!" he shouted. Victor's head snapped around. The distraction cost him. The scarred man's fist caught him across the jaw, spinning him sideways. He hit the ground hard, blood spraying from his mouth. "Victor!" Eliza screamed. The scarred man stood over Victor, sword raised, and then a voice cut through the chaos. "Enough!" Everyone froze. A man stepped through the doorway. He was older, maybe 50, with silver hair and cold blue eyes. He wore expensive clothes, tailored coat, polished boots, and carried himself like someone used to being obeyed. The scarred man lowered his sword immediately. Victor looked up from the floor, and his face went white. "Uncle," he said quietly. The older man smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Hello, Victor," he said. "You're a difficult man to kill." Lord Edmund's brother, Eliza didn't know his name, didn't care, walked into the ruined hut like he owned it. The men parted for him, deferential, watching their employer with the kind of wariness that came from knowing what happened when you displeased him. He looked around the hut, taking in the broken walls, the dying fire, the nest of blankets in the corner. His gaze landed on the babies, and his expression didn't change. "Two of them," he said. "Edward's spawn, I assume?" Victor tried to sit up. The scarred man kicked him in the ribs, and he went down again with a choked gasp. "Don't!" Eliza snarled. The man holding her tightened his grip, and she felt something sharp press against her side. A knife. "Quiet," he whispered in her ear. Victor's uncle, she decided to call him that until she learned otherwise, crouched down beside Victor, studying him like a specimen. "You've caused me a great deal of trouble, nephew," he said conversationally. "Running off with the boys, hiding in the wilderness, making me chase you all over Yorkshire in the middle of a flood." He sighed. "Do you have any idea how inconvenient this has been?" Victor spat blood. "Go to hell, Thomas." So that was his name. Thomas Hale. Thomas smiled. "You first." He stood brushing mud off his trousers and turned to the scarred man. "Kill him. Make it quick. I want this done before sundown." "No!" Eliza thrashed, but the knife dug deeper, and she felt blood trickle down her side. Thomas glanced at her, his expression mildly curious. "And who might you be?" "None of your business." "Ah."
The local woman who pulled them from the river, I assume. My men described you. Brave, foolish, loyal to a fault. He tilted his head. What's your name? Eliza Rowan. Well, Miss Rowan, I'm afraid you've made a very poor choice of allies. Victor is a dead man, has been since the moment he decided to interfere with my plans. And those babies, he gestured toward the corner. They're loose ends. I don't leave loose ends. Eliza's blood ran cold. They're children, infants. They're heirs, which makes them dangerous. Thomas turned to the scarred man. Gareth, once Victor's dead, kill the woman and the babies. Burn the hut. Make it look like an accident. Yes, my lord. Victor's eyes found Eliza's across the room. There was no resignation in them now, just fury. And something else, a warning. Don't, he mouthed. But Eliza wasn't listening. She drove her elbow backward, hard into the man holding her. He grunted, his grip loosening, and she twisted, grabbing the knife from his hand and jamming it into his thigh. He screamed, letting go, and she was free. She lunged for the babies. Gareth was faster. He caught her by the hair, yanking her back, and slammed her into the wall. Stars exploded across her vision. She hit the ground hard, gasping, tasting blood. Stupid bitch, Gareth muttered. Through blurred vision, Eliza saw Victor struggling to his feet. Thomas stepped forward, calm as ever, and kicked him in the stomach. Victor folded, retching. Stay down, Thomas said mildly. But Victor didn't stay down. He pushed himself up again, slower this time, blood dripping from his mouth and nose. His eyes were locked on his uncle. You won't get away with this, he rasped. I already have. Edmund's dead. Died 3 days ago. I'm the head of the family now. Everything's mine. The estates, the title, the mines, all of it. Thomas smiled. And once you and the boys are gone, there's no one left to contest it. Victor's face went slack. Father's dead? Peacefully, in his sleep. He never even knew you'd run. Thomas's smile widened. Isn't that poetic? Something broke in Victor's expression. Grief, raw and terrible, flooding through the cracks. Eliza saw it happen, saw the moment he stopped fighting for himself and started fighting for something else. He grabbed the broken iron bar from the floor and swung it at Gareth's head. Gareth blocked it with his sword, the impact ringing through the hut, and they grappled. Victor was wounded, exhausted, half dead on his feet, but he fought like a man possessed. He drove Gareth back, step by step, toward the door. Thomas watched, unimpressed. Enough of this, he said. He pulled a pistol from his coat, aimed it at Victor's back, and fired. The shot was deafening in the small space. Victor staggered. His hand went to his side, came away red. He looked down at the blood, then at his uncle, confusion and betrayal warring on his face. You! He collapsed. No! Eliza screamed. She tried to get to him, but hands grabbed her, dragging her back. She fought, kicking and clawing, but there were too many of them. They forced her to her knees, holding her in place. Thomas walked over to Victor's body, crouching down. He pressed 2 fingers to Victor's throat, checking for a pulse. Still alive, he said. Remarkable. He stood, reloading the pistol with practiced ease. But not for long. He aimed the gun at Victor's head, and Eliza made a choice. Wait, she shouted. Thomas paused, looking at her. Yes? Eliza's mind raced, grasping for anything, any leverage, any way to buy time. The babies, she said. You want them dead because they're heirs, because they threaten your claim. Obviously. But what if they weren't heirs? What if there was no claim to threaten? Thomas lowered the pistol slightly, interested. Explain. Eliza forced herself to think, to push past the panic and the fear. Victor's right. You kill him, you kill the babies. People will ask questions. The magistrate, the church, other family members. Someone will investigate. Someone always does. And you'll be the obvious suspect, the uncle who benefits most from their deaths. You might get away with it, might not. But there'll always be doubt, always be whispers. Thomas's eyes narrowed. What are you proposing? Let me take the babies. Let me disappear with them. I'll raise them as mine. No names, no titles, no connection to the Hale family. As far as the world's concerned, they died in the carriage crash. You get what you want. No heirs to challenge you.
and I get what I want. They live. Thomas stared at her. And Victor? Eliza's throat tightened. Do what you want with Victor, but leave the babies out of it. No, Victor gasped from the floor. Eliza, don't. Shut up, she snapped. She kept her eyes on Thomas. Well, do we have a deal? Thomas considered this, his head tilted, thinking. Then he smiled. No, he said, and shot Victor in the chest. Eliza screamed. Victor's body jerked once, then went still. You see, Thomas said, walking toward her, I don't make deals with peasants, and I don't leave loose ends. He gestured to Gareth. Kill her, kill the babies, burn it all. Gareth raised his sword, and the door exploded inward for the second time that day. Men poured through, a dozen of them, armed with rifles and pistols. At their head was a tall man in a magistrate's coat, his face grim and set. Drop your weapons, he shouted. In the name of the crown! Thomas's men froze, looking to their employer. Thomas's face went very still. The magistrate stepped forward, flanked by armed constables. He looked at the scene, Victor's body on the floor, Eliza bleeding and held at knife point, the babies crying in the corner, Thomas standing in the middle of it all with a smoking pistol in his hand. Lord Thomas Hale, the magistrate said. You're under arrest for the attempted murder of your nephew and conspiracy to commit murder. Thomas didn't move. You can't prove anything. I don't need to. I have a witness. He stepped aside and another figure entered the hut. Deputy Marsh, the young constable who'd come to Eliza's cottage. And behind him, leaning heavily on a walking stick, was an old man in expensive clothes, his face drawn and gray, but his eyes sharp. Victor's father, Edmund Hale, very much alive. Moshmet. The world seemed to stop. Thomas stared at his brother, his face draining of color. You're dead. The physician said a lot of things, Edmund interrupted, his voice weak but steady. Most of them wrong. I've been ill, yes, dying even, but not dead. He looked at Thomas with something that might have been pity. Not yet. Thomas took a step back. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Edmund's gaze moved to Victor's body on the floor, and his face crumpled. Oh, my boy, my boy. He tried to move toward Victor, but his legs gave out. Two constables caught him, easing him into a chair. The magistrate turned to Gareth. I said drop your weapons. Slowly, reluctantly, Gareth lowered his sword. The other men followed suit, letting their weapons fall. Thomas made a desperate grab for the pistol at his belt, but a constable was faster. He tackled Thomas to the ground, pinning him, and snapped iron manacles around his wrists. You'll hang for this, the magistrate said coldly. All of you. Eliza barely heard him. She was crawling toward Victor, her vision blurred with tears. She reached him, pressed her hands to his chest, feeling for a heartbeat. There. Faint. Thready. But there. He's alive, she gasped. He's still alive. The magistrate was beside her immediately, shouting orders. Get a physician, now! And someone help this woman. She's bleeding. Hands pulled Eliza back, but she fought them. Don't move him. Don't. The bullet's still in him. If you move him wrong. We know, a voice said, gentle, firm. A man in a physician's coat knelt beside Victor, his hands already moving, checking the wounds. We'll take care of him. Eliza let them pull her away. She sat against the wall, shaking, watching as they worked on Victor. The babies were still crying. Someone, Marsh, she realized, picked them up, one in each arm, and brought them to her. Here, he said quietly. They need you. Eliza took them, holding them close, and the crying stopped. They burrowed into her, seeking warmth, safety, comfort. She looked at Marsh. How did you know? I didn't, not at first. He glanced at Edmund, who was watching the physician work with desperate intensity. But Lord Edmund sent word to the magistrate 3 days ago, said his brother had tried to poison him, that Thomas had been embezzling from the estates for years, planning to seize control the moment Edmund died. He asked us to investigate quietly. And the carriage crash. We didn't know about that until I came to your cottage. When you turned me away, when you lied about the carriage, I knew something was wrong. So I reported back to the magistrate. We've been watching the valley ever since. When Thomas and his men rode out this morning, we followed. Eliza closed her eyes. You saved us. You saved them first, Marsh said. He looked at the babies in her arms. No one else would have. The physician stood, his face grave. We need to move him, now. If we don't get that bullet out in the next hour, he won't make it. Can he survive the journey to town? Edmund asked. I don't know, my lord, but staying here isn't an option. Edmund nodded, his face set. Then we move. Carefully. They fashioned a stretcher from blankets and poles, lifting Victor as gently as they could. He didn't wake, didn't make a sound. His face was gray, his breathing shallow. Eliza watched them carry him out of the hut, her heart in her throat. Edmund approached her, leaning heavily on his walking stick. Up close, she could see how ill he was, the sunken cheeks, the tremor in his hands, the way he struggled for breath. Miss Rowan, he said, I owe you a debt I can never repay. Just keep him alive, Eliza said. That's all I ask. Edmund looked at the babies in her arms. And Edward's sons. You saved them too. Anyone would have. No, most wouldn't have. Edmund reached out, his gnarled hand touching Storm's head gently. What are their names? I don't know. Victor never said. Henry and Thomas, named after their grandfathers. Edmund's voice cracked. My son Edward loved those boys, and someone killed him for it. Your brother? I don't know, but I intend to find out. Edmund straightened as much as his bent body would allow. Come with us, Miss Rowan. You and the boys. You'll be safe in my house. You'll be cared for. Eliza hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to run, to take the babies and disappear into the wilderness where no one could find them. But she looked at the babies, at Henry and Thomas, Victor's nephews, Edward's sons, and she knew she couldn't. They deserved more than hiding, more than running. They deserved their names, their birthright, their family. All right, she said quietly. We'll come. Edmund smiled, a sad, tired smile, and turned to leave. But Eliza stayed where she was, holding the babies, watching as they loaded Victor into a wagon. His hand hung limply over the side, pale and lifeless. She thought of the river, of dragging him out of the water, of the choice she'd made in that moment, the choice that had led to all of this. She should have left him there, should have let the river take him. But she hadn't. And now, watching them carry him away, she wondered if she'd saved him, or damned them both. The wagon pulled away, disappearing into the trees, and Eliza Rowan, holding two babies who weren't hers, followed it into the unknown. The Hale estate sat on a hill overlooking 3 counties, all stone and iron and windows that caught the light like cold eyes. Eliza had never seen anything like it. The main house was bigger than her entire village, with wings that sprawled in every direction and gardens that went on forever, even in winter. She hated it on sight. The wagon carrying Victor had arrived an hour before theirs, racing ahead with the physician and half the constables. By the time Eliza's wagon pulled up to the main entrance, the house was already in chaos. Servants running, voices shouting, the kind of controlled panic that came when someone important was dying. Edmund climbed down from the wagon with difficulty, waving off the footman who tried to help him. He looked at Eliza, still holding the babies. Come, he said. We'll get you settled. Settled. Like she was a guest, like she belonged here. Eliza followed him inside. The entrance hall was massive, all marble floors and carved columns and a ceiling so high her eyes couldn't quite find the top of it. Paintings lined the walls, severe-looking men and women in expensive clothes, staring down at her with judgment. She felt small, dirty, out of place. A woman in black appeared, her face pale and tight. Housekeeper, Eliza guessed. Lord Edmund, the woman said, her voice clipped. The physician is with Master Victor now. He's asking for you. How is he? The woman's face didn't change. Alive, for now. Edmund nodded, his jaw tightening. He turned to Eliza. Mrs. Brennan will show you to your rooms. Get cleaned up. Rest. I'll send for you when there's news. I want to see him. You will. But not yet. Edmund's voice was gentle but firm. Let the physician work. He left before she could argue, moving faster than she would have thought possible for a dying man.
Eliza stood in the entrance hall, holding 2 babies, surrounded by servants who stared at her like she'd crawled out of a ditch. Which, to be fair, she had, Mrs.
Brennan stepped forward, her eyes flicking over Eliza's muddy clothes, her tangled hair, the blood still crusted on her side. "This way," she said, her tone making it clear that Eliza was an inconvenience. Eliza followed her up a grand staircase, down a hall lined with more paintings, into a room that was bigger than her entire cottage. A 4-poster bed dominated one wall draped in silk. A fireplace crackled softly. Windows overlooked the gardens. "The nursery is connected," Mrs. Brennan said, gesturing to a door on the left. "I'll have a wet nurse sent up for the children. I'll feed them myself." Mrs. Brennan's eyebrow arched. "You're not their mother." "I'm the closest thing they have right now." They stared at each other. Mrs. Brennan's mouth thinned, but she didn't argue. "A bath will be drawn for you," she said. "Fresh clothes will be provided. Dinner's at 8, but I suspect Lord Edmund will want you available before then."
"I'm not eating dinner in that hall." "You'll do as Lord Edmund asks." Mrs. Brennan's voice could have cut glass. "This is his house. His rules." She left before Eliza could respond, the door clicking shut behind her. Eliza stood in the middle of the enormous room, the baby still in her arms, and felt the walls closing in. She'd made a terrible mistake coming here. But the wet nurse arrived 20 minutes later, a round-faced woman with kind eyes and capable hands. She took one look at the babies and smiled. "Oh, the poor darlings," she said. "Let me see them." Eliza handed over Henry first, then Thomas, watching as the wet nurse examined them with practiced efficiency. She checked their eyes, their mouths, their fingers and toes, making soft cooing sounds the whole time. "They're healthy," she announced. "A bit thin, but nothing some good feeding won't fix." She looked at Eliza. "You've done well with them, miss." "I did what I could. It was enough." The wet nurse settled into a rocking chair by the fire, cradling Thomas. "I'll take care of them now. You get yourself cleaned up. You look half dead." Eliza wanted to argue, wanted to keep the babies close, but exhaustion was dragging at her bones, and the wet nurse was right. She was filthy, bleeding, and running on fumes. "I'll be back," she said. "We'll be here." Eliza went into the adjoining bathroom, where a copper tub had already been filled with steaming water. She stripped off her ruined clothes, lowering herself into the bath with a hiss. The hot water stung every cut and scrape, but it felt good. Clean. She scrubbed herself raw, washing away days of mud and blood and fear. Her hands shook, her ribs ached. The knife wound in her side was shallow but ugly, a ragged line that would scar. She didn't care. When she finally climbed out, wrapped in a towel that was softer than anything she'd ever owned, she found fresh clothes laid out on the bed. A dress. Dark blue, simple but well made. It fit her almost perfectly. She stared at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was a stranger, clean, dressed like someone with money, hair brushed and pinned back. But her eyes were the same, hard, wary, waiting for the other shoe to drop. A knock at the door. "Come in," Eliza said. A young maid entered, bobbing a curtsy. "Lord Edmund is asking for you, miss, in Master Victor's room." Eliza's stomach clenched. "Is he—" "Alive, miss. The physician got the bullet out, but Lord Edmund wants you there." Eliza followed the maid down another hall, up another staircase, into a part of the house that was quieter, darker. The maid stopped at a heavy oak door, knocked once, and pushed it open. Victor's room was dim, lit only by a few candles and the glow of the fire. The air smelled like blood and laudanum. In the center of the room, Victor lay in a massive bed, pale as the sheets he was wrapped in. His chest rose and fell slowly, each breath labored. Edmund sat beside the bed, holding Victor's hand. He looked up when Eliza entered, and she saw the exhaustion in his face. The fear. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "How is he?" "The physician says the next 24 hours will tell. The bullet missed his lung by inches, but there's damage. Internal bleeding. Infection is a risk." Edmund's voice cracked. "He's strong, but he's been through so much." Eliza moved to the other side of the bed, looking down at Victor. He was so still, so quiet. Nothing like the man who'd argued with her in the shepherd's hut, who'd handed her the shotgun and said, "Together." "He saved my life," she said softly, "more than once."
And you saved his. Edmund looked at her. The magistrate told me what you did, how you pulled him from the river, how you protected the boys, how you stood between them and Thomas's men even when you knew it would cost you everything. I didn't think about the cost. That's what makes it brave. Eliza didn't feel brave. She felt tired, scared, like she was standing on the edge of a cliff waiting for someone to push her off. Why am I here? She asked. Really? Edmund was quiet for a moment. Because Victor would want you here. Because those boys need you. And because... He paused. Because I think you need us, too. Eliza's throat tightened. I don't need anyone. Everyone needs someone, Miss Rowan. Even the strongest of us. She didn't have an answer to that. Edmund stood, his movements stiff and painful. I'll leave you with him for a while. Talk to him. The physician says it helps, even if he can't hear you. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything. Just be here. He left, the door closing softly behind him. Eliza stood beside the bed, looking down at Victor. In the candlelight, he looked younger, vulnerable. The sharp edges of his face softened by shadow. She pulled up a chair and sat down. You better not die, she said quietly. I didn't drag you out of that river for you to die in a fancy bed. Victor didn't answer, didn't move. Eliza reached out, her hand hovering over his for a moment before she pulled it back. I don't know why I'm here, she continued. Your father thinks I belong here. The servants think I'm dirt. And you're unconscious, so you don't get a vote. She laughed, sharp and bitter. I should leave, take the boys and disappear. It's what I'm good at. Still nothing. But I won't, she said. Because you're an idiot, and someone needs to make sure you don't do something stupid when you wake up. Like forgiving your uncle, or getting yourself killed again. She sat back, her hands folded in her lap, and watched the firelight dance across his face. Don't die, she said again, softer this time. Please. The next 3 days were the longest of Eliza's life. Victor didn't wake. His fever spiked and fell, keeping the physician busy and Edmund on the edge of collapse. Eliza spent most of her time in the nursery with the boys or sitting beside Victor's bed, watching him breathe. The servants whispered about her. She heard them in the halls, in the kitchens, when they thought she wasn't listening. Who does she think she is? Common as dirt, no family, no money. Lord Edmund's lost his mind letting her stay here. She's after the fortune, mark my words. Eliza ignored them. She'd heard worse, been called worse. Their opinions didn't matter. What mattered was Victor, and the boys, and staying alive long enough to see this through. On the 4th day, Victor opened his eyes. Eliza was reading to him, one of the books from the shelf in his room, something about ancient Rome that she barely understood, when his hand twitched. She stopped mid-sentence, looking down. His eyes were open, gray and unfocused, but open. Victor, she said. He blinked slowly, his gaze sliding over to her. Recognition flickered. Eliza, he rasped. Relief hit her so hard she nearly dropped the book. You're awake. Am I? He tried to sit up, gasped, and fell back. Feels like I'm dead. You're not, though you tried very hard to be. He managed a weak smile. Story of my life. Eliza set the book aside, leaning forward. How do you feel? Like I've been shot twice and thrown off a cliff. He paused. The boys? Safe. Healthy. The wet nurse is spoiling them rotten. And my uncle? In custody, awaiting trial for attempted murder, conspiracy, embezzlement, and probably a dozen other things the magistrate is still digging up. Victor closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. My father? Alive? Barely. But he's stubborn, like you. That's not a compliment. It wasn't meant to be. Victor laughed, then winced, his hand going to his bandaged chest. Don't make me laugh. It hurts. Then stop being funny. They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling softly in the background. Thank you, Victor said quietly. For staying, for not leaving when you could have. Where would I go? Anywhere. You don't owe me anything, Eliza. You could have walked away a dozen times, and you didn't. I'm stubborn too. I noticed.
Eliza looked down at her hands, picking at a loose thread on her dress. Your father wants me to stay. Help with the boys. He says they need someone who knows them. And what do you want? That was the question, wasn't it? What did she want? A week ago, the answer would have been simple. Her cottage, her land, her solitude. Freedom from people who judged her, whispered about her, blamed her for things she couldn't control. But now? Now she didn't know. I want the boys to be safe, she said finally. I want them to have a life, a real one, not hiding in ditches or running from men with knives. They will. I'll make sure of it. How? Your uncle tried to kill you. Your father's dying. You've got enemies in your own family who won't stop until you're dead. She met his eyes. How do you fight that? Victor was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, he admitted. But I'll figure it out. I have to. You can't do it alone.
I'm not alone. I have you. Eliza's breath caught. Victor, I'm serious. He shifted slightly, turning to face her more directly. You're the strongest person I've ever met, Eliza. You saved my life. You saved those boys. You stood up to armed men and didn't flinch. If I'm going to rebuild this family, tear out the rot and make sure Henry and Thomas grow up safe. I need you. I'm not a lady. I'm not educated. I don't know the first thing about running an estate or navigating your world. Neither do I, half the time. We'll figure it out together. Together. That word again. Eliza wanted to say no, wanted to run, but when she looked at Victor, bruised and broken but still fighting, she couldn't. All right, she said. I'll stay. For now. Victor's face softened. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen what happens when I'm bored. He smiled. I'm looking forward to it. Ma. The trial of Thomas Hale began 2 weeks later. Eliza didn't attend. Neither did Victor. He was still bedridden, healing slowly. But Edmund went, along with the magistrate and half the gentry of Yorkshire. The evidence was damning. Testimonies from servants who'd been bribed or threatened, financial records showing years of embezzlement, letters proving Thomas had orchestrated the attack on Victor and the poisoning of Edward and his wife. It took the jury less than an hour to reach a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Thomas was sentenced to hang. Edmund came home that night looking 10 years older. He sat by Victor's bedside, holding his son's hand, and wept. It's over, he said. It's finally over. But it wasn't. Not really. Over the next month, more enemies surfaced. Cousins who'd been complicit, business partners who'd helped Thomas hide his crimes, servants who'd turned a blind eye. Edmund was ruthless. He stripped titles, seized assets, exiled family members, and rebuilt the estate from the ground up. It was ugly work, and it took a toll on him. His health deteriorated rapidly, the cancer eating through him faster than the physicians could treat. But he didn't stop. Not until every last traitor had been rooted out. Victor recovered slowly, spending his days relearning how to walk without pain, how to breathe without his ribs screaming. Eliza stayed by his side, helping him through the worst of it, arguing with him when he pushed too hard, forcing him to rest when he refused. They fought constantly, about everything, about the estate, the boys, the future, about his stubbornness and her pride and the fact that neither of them knew how to ask for help without making it sound like a challenge. But they also laughed, talked, shared stories late into the night when the house was quiet and the fire burned low. Eliza told him about Thomas, her dead husband, about the loneliness of the cottage and the weight of being the town pariah. Victor told her about Edward, about the pressure of being the heir and the guilt of surviving when his brother hadn't. They were broken, both of them, scarred, but they fit together in a way that made sense, even when it didn't. One night, 6 weeks after the trial, Edmund called them both to his study. He looked terrible, gaunt and gray, his hands shaking as he poured himself a glass of brandy. Sit, he said. They sat. Edmund took a long drink, then set the glass down. I'm dying. We all know it. The physicians give me a month, maybe 2. Father, Victor started. Let me finish. Edmund's voice was firm. When I'm gone, you'll inherit everything. The title, the estates, the responsibility. It's what I've prepared you for your entire life. Victor nodded, his jaw tight. But you can't do it alone, Edmund continued.
He looked at Eliza. And neither can Miss Rowan. Eliza frowned. I don't understand. Edmund leaned forward. Those boys, Henry and Thomas, they're Edward's legacy, his blood. They deserve to grow up knowing their family, knowing their history, but they also deserve to grow up loved, protected, by someone who sees them as children first and heirs second. They have Victor, Eliza said. They have Victor as an uncle. They need more than that. Edmund's gaze moved between them. They need parents, both of you. The room went very quiet. What are you saying? Victor asked carefully. I'm saying you should marry, Edmund said bluntly. Not for love, though I hope that comes in time, but for the boys, for the estate, for each other. Eliza's heart stopped. You can't be serious. I'm entirely serious. Edmund looked at her. You love those boys, don't deny it. I've seen you with them. And Victor trusts you more than anyone in this world. You've proven your loyalty a dozen times over. I'm a widow from a flooded valley, Eliza said. I have no title, no family, no money. Your world will eat me alive. Let them try. Edmund's smile was sharp. You survived a river, armed men, and my brother. I think you can handle a few society matrons. Eliza looked at Victor. He was staring at his father, his expression unreadable. Victor? She said. He turned to her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she couldn't read his face. It makes sense, he said slowly. Politically, strategically. The boys would be secure. The estate would be stable. And he paused. We work well together. That's not a reason to get married. Isn't it? Victor leaned forward. I'm not asking for love, Eliza. I'm asking for partnership, for someone I can trust to stand beside me when the world comes at us. And I don't trust anyone the way I trust you. Eliza's throat tightened. This is insane. Probably, Victor agreed. But so is everything else we've done. Edmund stood, his movements slow and pained. Think about it, both of you. You have time. He left the room, leaving them alone. Eliza and Victor sat in silence, the weight of the proposal settling over them like a blanket. Finally, Eliza spoke. Do you want this? Victor didn't answer right away. I want the boys to be safe. I want to rebuild this family into something worth keeping, and I want... He stopped, looking at her. I want you here. Not as a servant or a guest. As an equal. Marriage doesn't make us equals. Then we make it equal. We write our own rules. Victor's voice was steady. I'm not asking you to be someone you're not, Eliza. I'm asking you to be exactly who you are, but with the power to protect what matters. Eliza stood, pacing to the window. Outside, the gardens were dark, the stars bright overhead. She thought about the cottage, about the river, about the choice she'd made that day to pull a stranger from the water. Every choice since then had led here. To this room, this man, this impossible offer. She turned to face him. If I say yes, she said, I'm not changing. I'm not becoming some quiet, obedient wife who smiles and nods and lets you make all the decisions. I wouldn't want you to. And I'm not giving up the boys. They're mine too. I know. And if your family tries to push me out, I'll push back. Hard. Victor smiled. I'd expect nothing less. Eliza crossed her arms, studying him. This is crazy. Completely. We'll probably kill each other within a year. Maybe. But it'll be interesting. Despite herself, Eliza felt her mouth twitch. You're an idiot. So you've said. She took a deep breath. All right, yes, I'll marry you. Victor's face lit up. Not with triumph or relief, but with something warmer, softer. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen what happens when I'm Lady Hale. I'm looking forward to it. Eliza crossed the room and held out her hand. Victor took it, his grip warm and steady, and they shook, sealing the strangest, most unconventional agreement either of them had ever made. Outside, thunder rumbled. The first drops of rain began to fall. But inside, for the first time since the flood, Eliza felt something she hadn't felt in years. The wedding was set for 3 weeks later. Eliza hated every minute of the planning.
There were dressmakers and florists and caterers and endless meetings with people whose names she couldn't remember and didn't care to learn. Mrs. Brennan orchestrated it all with military precision, her face a mask of disapproval every time Eliza rejected another suggestion. "The lace from Brussels is traditional," Mrs. Brennan said, holding up a sample that looked like it had been made by spiders with delusions of grandeur. "It's ugly," Eliza replied. "The Dowager Duchess wore this exact pattern at her wedding." Then she had bad taste, too. Mrs. Brennan's mouth thinned to a razor line. "Miss Rowan, you are marrying into one of the oldest families in England. There are expectations, standards. Then lower them." Victor, watching from his chair by the window, didn't bother hiding his smile. His ribs were still wrapped, his movements still careful, but he was healing, getting stronger every day. Mrs. Brennan turned to him, exasperated. "Master Victor, please reason with her." "I wouldn't dare," Victor said. "She's terrifying when she's right." "I'm always right," Eliza muttered. The dressmaker, a nervous woman with pins sticking out of her collar like she'd been attacked by a porcupine, cleared her throat. "Perhaps a compromise? Simple lace? Ivory silk? Modest train?" Eliza looked at the sketch. It was clean, elegant, not drowning in frills and ribbon and the kind of excess that made her teeth ache. "Fine," she said. "But no veil. I'm not hiding my face. But tradition. I don't care about tradition. Next problem." Mrs. Brennan gathered her papers with a martyred sigh. "The guest list. 300 invitations have been sent." Eliza's head snapped up. 300? "The entire peerage will be attending. Dukes, earls, viscounts, members of parliament. Cancel it." Mrs. Brennan blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "Cancel it, all of it. I'm not putting on a show for 300 strangers who think I'm beneath them. Miss Rowan, this wedding is not just about you. It's about the family, the estate, the future of the Hale legacy." "The future of what? A bunch of titled parasites who'd sell their own children for a better seat at dinner?" Eliza stood, her voice hard. "I didn't survive a flood and a murder attempt to stand in front of people who despise me and pretend to be grateful for their approval." Victor stood too, moving to her side despite the wince of pain that crossed his face. "Eliza's right. Cancel the big ceremony. We'll do something smaller, family only." "But Lord Edmund specifically requested—" "We'll understand," Victor finished. "This is our wedding, Mrs. Brennan. Not the peerage's entertainment." Mrs. Brennan looked between them, her jaw working like she was chewing glass. Finally, she nodded stiffly. "As you wish. I'll inform the staff and send the regrets." She left, taking the dressmaker and the florist with her, their whispers trailing down the hallway like leaves in a wind. Eliza sank back into her chair, rubbing her temples. "I hate this, all of it. I know. Why does everything have to be so complicated?" Victor sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Because we're upending 300 years of tradition, and people don't like change, especially when it makes them look bad." "Do you like change?" He was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes thoughtful. "I like you, so yes." Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks. She wasn't used to this, to kindness, to someone standing beside her instead of against her. It made her uncomfortable, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with knives or guns. "Don't get sentimental," she said. "We're doing this for the boys." "Of course," Victor said, but his smile said otherwise. From the nursery down the hall, they could hear one of the babies crying. Storm, probably. He had a set of lungs that could wake the dead. "I should go," Eliza said. "The wet nurse. I want to." She stood, then paused. "Victor?" "Yes?" "Thank you for backing me up in there." "Always." She left before he could see the smile on her face. Edmund died 2 days before the wedding. He went peacefully, in his sleep, with Victor holding his hand and a book of poetry open on the nightstand. When the physician confirmed it, Victor didn't cry, didn't break down. He just sat there, staring at his father's still face, his jaw tight and his eyes dry. Eliza found him an hour later, still sitting beside the bed. "Victor?" she said softly from the doorway. He didn't answer, didn't move. She pulled up a chair and sat beside him, not touching, just present. They stayed like that for a long time, the silence heavy between them, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Finally, Victor spoke. He was a hard man, demanding, impossible to please. His voice cracked. But he loved us, in his way. He loved Edward and me and even Thomas before Thomas went bad. He wanted the family to be something good. I know. He wanted to see us married, wanted to know the boys would be safe, that the estate would survive. He knew. He died knowing. Victor turned to look at her, his eyes red but dry. Did he? Or did I fail him? You didn't fail anyone, Victor. You saved those boys. You exposed your uncle. You're rebuilding everything Thomas destroyed. Your father knew that. That's why he could let go. Victor's fingers tightened on the armrest. I don't know if I can do this without him. You won't have to. You have me. He looked at their hands, close but not touching on the edge of the bed. Promise? Promise. They buried Edmund 3 days later in the family plot overlooking the valley where the river had finally receded, leaving behind mud and wreckage and the ghosts of what had been. Half of Yorkshire turned out for the funeral, lords and ladies, magistrates and clergy, servants and tenants. They filled the church, spilled out into the grounds, stood in the cold drizzle to pay their respects to a man who'd been hard but fair, demanding but honest. Eliza stood beside Victor through all of it, holding Henry while Victor held Thomas. The boys were too young to understand what was happening, but they were quiet, solemn, like they sensed something important was shifting in the world around them. When it was over, when the last guest had left and the house had fallen into the strange quiet that follows death, Victor turned to Eliza. We're still getting married, he said. I know. Tomorrow, like we planned. All right. He looked at her for a long moment, studying her face. Are you sure? We could wait. Give it more time. No one would blame us. Time for what? For you to change your mind? For me to run back to my cottage? Eliza shook her head. No, we do this now. We do it right. We show everyone that we're not backing down. Victor's face softened. Together? Together. They were married the next morning in the estate's private chapel. No guests, no fanfare, no 300 strangers in expensive clothes pretending to care. Just the magistrate who'd saved them in the shepherd's hut, Mrs. Brennan as witness, and the boys sleeping in a wicker basket at their feet, wrapped in blankets that had been Edmund's when he was a baby. Eliza wore the ivory dress, simple and clean, with no lace from Brussels and no veil to hide behind. Her hair was pinned up simply, a few loose strands curling around her face. She looked at herself in the mirror before coming down and barely recognized the woman staring back. Clean, whole, almost beautiful. Victor wore black, still in mourning, but his eyes were clear when he turned to watch her walk down the short aisle. There was no music, no flowers, just the sound of her footsteps on stone and the crackle of candles burning. The magistrate read the vows, his voice solemn and steady. Victor repeated them without hesitation, his gaze never leaving Eliza's face. Then it was Eliza's turn. She hesitated. I'm not good at this, she said. At saying the right things or being what people expect. Then don't, Victor said. Just be you. Eliza took a breath. I promise to stand beside you, to fight for you and those boys and this family we're building. I promise not to run when things get hard, even though I'll want to. Even though every instinct I have will tell me to disappear before it all falls apart. She paused. And I promise to be honest, even when it hurts, even when the truth is ugly. Victor smiled. That's all I need. The magistrate cleared his throat. Do you, Victor Nathaniel Hale, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward? I do. And do you, Eliza Catherine Rowan, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward? Eliza looked at Victor, at the man who'd trusted her with his life, his nephews, his fractured family and impossible future, the man who'd given her a choice and respected it, who'd fought beside her and never once asked her to be anything other than what she was. I do. Then, by the power vested in me by the crown and the church, I pronounce you husband and wife. Victor leaned forward and kissed her. It was brief, careful, more question than answer, but when he pulled back, he was smiling.
"Hello, Lady Hale," he said. Eliza grimaced. "I hate that title already." "You'll get used to it." "Doubtful." Mrs. Brennan stepped forward, surprisingly misty-eyed, a handkerchief pressed to her nose. "Congratulations, my lord, my lady."
Lord Edmund would have been proud. "Thank you, Mrs. Brennan," Victor said, then quieter. "For everything. For staying when others left. For believing in us." The housekeeper nodded stiffly and left, dabbing at her eyes, her footsteps echoing down the empty hall. Eliza looked down at the boys, still sleeping peacefully in their basket, oblivious to the fact that their world had just changed forever. "What now?" she asked. "Now we figure out how to run an estate, raise 2 children, and survive the wolves circling outside our door." "Sounds easy," Victor laughed. "You're a terrible liar." "Good thing you like me anyway." He pulled her close, careful of his still healing ribs, and rested his forehead against hers. "More than like." "Don't get ahead of yourself," Eliza said, but she was smiling. The wolves came 3 weeks later. Eliza was in the library with the estate manager, a nervous man named Pemberton who sweated whenever she asked questions, going over accounts that hadn't been properly managed in years. The numbers were a mess, half of them forged by Thomas to hide his embezzling, the other half simply neglected. "This column here," Eliza said, pointing. "Where did this money go?" Pemberton squinted at the ledger. "I believe that was allocated to mine repairs, my lady."
"When?" "2 years ago." "And were the repairs completed?" I'm not certain." "Then find out. I want a full accounting of every expense over the past 5 years. Everything Thomas touched, I want verified." "That will take months, my lady." "Then you better start now." Pemberton gathered his papers with trembling hands, clearly terrified of her, and scurried out. Mrs. Brennan appeared in the doorway before Eliza could catch her breath. "My lady, you have visitors."
Eliza looked up from the ledger, her head already aching. "Who?" "Lady Catherine Hale, Lord Edmund's sister, and her son, Mr. Richard Hale." Eliza's stomach dropped like a stone. She'd heard about Catherine, Edmund's younger sister, sharp-tongued and ambitious, who'd married a wealthy merchant and spent the last 30 years trying to erase that fact from everyone's memory. And Richard was Thomas's eldest son, the one who'd been conveniently absent during the trial, studying law in London while his father plotted murder. "Where's Victor?" "In the nursery with the boys, my lady. Should I fetch him?" "No, keep him there." Eliza stood, smoothing her skirts. "Show them to the drawing room. I'll be down in a moment." Mrs. Brennan hesitated. "My lady, perhaps you should wait for Lord Victor." "No, I'll handle this." She went downstairs, her heart hammering, but her face calm. The drawing room was on the first floor, all windows and light, designed to make guests feel welcomed and important. Eliza had always hated it. When she entered, Catherine and Richard were waiting, standing by the fireplace like they owned the place. Neither of them sat. A power play. Catherine was tall, elegant, with iron gray hair swept up in an elaborate style and eyes that could cut glass. She wore black silk, still in mourning for Edmund, but the cut was expensive, fashionable. Richard was younger, maybe 30, with his father's dark hair and sharp features, but his mother's calculating eyes. "Lady Catherine," Eliza said, keeping her voice neutral. "Mr. Hale." "Welcome." Catherine's gaze raked over her, assessing every detail. "So you're the infamous Miss Rowan, or should I say Lady Hale now?" "Either works. I suppose congratulations are in order, though I must say the timing is rather convenient. Marrying my nephew mere days after my brother's death. The timing was your brother's idea, actually. He wanted us married before he died. He made that very clear." Catherine's mouth thinned. How very like Edmund, always meddling even from his deathbed. Richard stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back. "We're here to discuss the estate. There are concerns about the management, the finances, the future of the family." "What concerns?" Eliza asked, though she could guess. "You," Richard said bluntly. "A common widow with no family, no education, no understanding of how estates are run, no experience with finances or politics or the responsibilities that come with the Hale name. And yet here you are, married to the heir, playing house with two bastards. Careful, Eliza said, her voice dropping to ice. Those boys are Victor's nephews, Edward's legitimate sons, heirs to this estate. And if you call them bastards again, I'll throw you out myself and make sure you're never allowed back. Richard's face flushed red. You can't threaten me. I just did. Catherine held up a hand, her rings catching the light. Richard, enough. She turned to Eliza, her expression calculating. Forgive my son. He's concerned about the family legacy. As am I. You must understand, Miss Rowan, this is all very irregular. My name is Lady Hale now, and there's nothing irregular about a widow remarrying. When the widow in question was unknown 6 months ago and now controls one of the largest estates in Yorkshire, that's irregular. Catherine moved closer, her voice soft and dangerous. What are your intentions, Lady Hale? My intentions? For the estate, for the boys, for my nephew. Catherine's eyes narrowed. You've positioned yourself very cleverly, but we both know you don't belong here. Eliza felt anger spark in her chest, hot and sharp. I belong here because Victor wants me here, because Edmund wanted me here, because I've earned my place. Earned it how? By pulling Victor from a river? By playing nursemaid to Edward's children? Catherine's smile was cold. That doesn't make you family, dear. That makes you convenient. Then you should be pleased. Victor's cleaning up the mess your brother Thomas made, rebuilding what was stolen, making sure the boys have a future instead of being murdered for their inheritance. Under your influence. Yes, under my influence, because without me, they'd all be dead. Catherine's eyes flashed. You're very confident for someone who didn't exist in our world 6 months ago. I existed. You just didn't notice. None of you did. Eliza stepped closer, her voice hard. You were too busy plotting and scheming and tearing each other apart to notice the flood coming, to notice the bodies piling up, to notice that Thomas was destroying everything Edmund built. And you think you can do better? I know I can, because I'm not interested in titles or inheritance or who gets invited to which dinner. I'm interested in keeping those boys alive and making sure this estate survives. That's it. That's all I care about. Richard moved toward Eliza, his hand reaching for her arm. You arrogant little... The door opened. Victor stood there, his face cold and set, Thomas in his arms. Touch her, Richard, and I'll break your arm. Possibly your neck. Richard froze, his hand suspended in midair. Victor walked into the room, calm and deliberate, and stood beside Eliza. Thomas gurgled happily, reaching for Eliza's hair. Aunt Catherine, cousin. What an unexpected surprise. Victor, Catherine said, her voice tight. We were just discussing the future of the estate with your wife. Were you? How kind. Victor's tone was pleasant, but his eyes were steel. Let me save you the trouble. Eliza is my wife. She's co-manager of this estate. She has full authority over the household, the finances, and the raising of Henry and Thomas. If you have concerns, you bring them to both of us. If you insult her again, you'll find yourself no longer welcome here. Are we clear? Catherine's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake, Victor. This woman has no breeding, no education, no understanding of... This woman saved my life, saved the boys, saved this family from tearing itself apart. Victor's voice was hard now, brooking no argument. So no, Aunt Catherine, I'm not making a mistake. I'm making a choice, and I'm standing by it. The question is whether you can accept that or whether you'd prefer to leave. The room went very quiet. Catherine looked between them, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to Richard. Come, we're leaving. But, Mother, now, Richard. Richard shot Eliza a look of pure hatred before following his mother to the door. Catherine paused in the doorway, looking back. This isn't over, Victor, she said quietly. The family is watching, and they won't be as forgiving as I am. Let them watch, Victor replied. We have nothing to hide. Catherine nodded once, then left, her skirt swishing, Richard trailing behind her like a whipped dog. When the front door closed, Eliza exhaled slowly, her hands shaking. That went well, she muttered. They'll be back. With more family members, more arguments, more attempts to undermine us. I know. Victor shifted Thomas to his other hip, then reached out and took Eliza's hand. You didn't need me to handle that. No, but it was nice to have backup, he smiled. That's what marriage is, right? Backup when you need it, partnership when you don't. Among other things, Thomas made a grab for Victor's nose, giggling when Victor pretended to bite his fingers. The moment of levity cut through the tension, and Eliza felt herself relax slightly. "They're going to make our lives hell," she said. "Probably. But we've survived worse." "Have we?" "You survived the river. I survived getting shot twice. Together we survived Thomas and his hired killers. I think we can handle some gossiping relatives." Eliza looked down at their joined hands. "I hope you're right." "I am. Trust me." And despite everything, despite the threat hanging over them, despite the family circling like sharks, she did. Over the next 6 months, they proved it. The estate flourished under their joint management. Victor handled the politics, the business meetings, the endless negotiations with tenants and investors and merchants. He was good at it, patient, strategic, willing to compromise when it made sense, but firm when it didn't. Eliza handled the household, the finances, the day-to-day running of a place that employed 200 people and covered 3 counties. She was ruthless about cutting waste, renegotiating contracts, and holding people accountable. The servants were terrified of her at first, but they learned quickly that she was fair. Demanding, but fair. They fought constantly. About money, about priorities, about how to raise the boys, but they also listened, compromised, found solutions that neither of them would have thought of alone. "We can't afford to repair all the tenant cottages at once," Victor said one evening, papers spread across the desk in the study. "Then we prioritize," Eliza said. "Worst conditions first, families with children. We fix those, then move on to the next tier. That'll take years. Better than letting people live in squalor while we debate aesthetics." Victor looked at the list, then nodded. "You're right. We'll start next week." The boys thrived. Henry was loud and adventurous, always climbing, always exploring, always getting into trouble. At 9 months old, he could already pull himself up on furniture and had an alarming tendency to chew on everything within reach. Thomas was quieter, thoughtful, content to sit and watch the world with those big dark eyes. He smiled more readily than Henry, laughed at things his brother ignored, and had already figured out that if he cried in a certain way, someone would pick him up immediately. They adored Eliza, reached for her when she entered a room, settled when she held them. And one afternoon in late autumn, when she was reading to them in the nursery, Henry looked up at her and said, clear as day, "Mama." Eliza froze. Henry repeated it, patting her face with his chubby hand. "Mama. Mama." The book slipped from her fingers. Victor found her 20 minutes later, still sitting on the floor of the nursery, tears streaming down her face, Henry in her arms. "What's wrong?" he asked, alarmed, dropping to his knees beside her. "He called me Mama," Eliza said, her voice breaking. Victor's face softened instantly. "You are his mama." "I'm not. I'm just the woman who pulled him from the river. I'm not his mother. His mother is dead. You're the woman who saved his life, who feeds him and holds him and reads to him every night, who rocks him when he's fussy and sings to him when he can't sleep." Victor reached out, gently wiping the tears from her cheeks. "You're the woman who loves him. That makes you his mother in every way that matters." Eliza looked down at Henry, who was staring up at her with wide, trusting eyes, completely oblivious to the fact that he'd just shattered her heart and rebuilt it in the same breath. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "None of us do. We just try. We do our best and hope it's enough." Henry grabbed her finger, holding tight, and said it again. "Mama." Thomas, not to be outdone, crawled over and patted her knee. "Mama." Eliza laughed through her tears, pulling both boys close. All right. I'm your mama." Victor wrapped his arms around all 3 of them, and they sat there on the floor of the nursery as the afternoon light faded. A family built not from blood but from choice, from survival, from the stubborn refusal to let the world break them. The challenges didn't stop. Catherine spread rumors through the social circles, whispers that Eliza had trapped Victor, that she was after the fortune, that the boys weren't really Edward's sons. Other family members contested the will, claiming Edmund had been mentally incompetent when he'd changed it to favor Victor and the boys. Investors pulled out, worried about the estate's future under new, untested management. Creditors came calling, demanding payment on debts Thomas had hidden. The mine workers threatened to strike over wages that hadn't been paid in months. But Eliza and Victor fought back. They paid the workers first, selling off some of Thomas's seized assets to cover the wages. They invited the creditors to the estate, showed them the books, negotiated payment plans that wouldn't bankrupt the estate. They hired auditors to prove the boys' legitimacy, providing birth records and witness testimonies that shut down Catherine's rumors. And slowly, grudgingly, the world began to accept them. The turning point came 9 months after the wedding. Eliza was in the drawing room reviewing tenant requests when Victor burst in. His face was flushed, his eyes bright with something that looked like barely contained excitement. "We got it," he said, breathless. Eliza looked up from the papers. "Got what?" "The railway contract. The one we've been negotiating for months with the Northern Railway Company." He was grinning, practically vibrating. "They agreed to our terms. All of them. The line will run through our land, connecting the mines directly to the port in Newcastle. It's going to triple our revenue within 2 years." Eliza stared at him, the papers forgotten. "Triple?" "At least. Maybe quadruple if the projections are right." He moved to the desk, spreading out a map. "Look, the line runs here, through the Eastern Valley. We lease them the land. They pay us a percentage of all goods transported, plus a flat fee for access. It's the biggest contract the estate has ever secured." "That's—" Eliza stood, moving to look at the map. "That's incredible." "It's more than incredible. It's proof. Proof that we know what we're doing, that we can run this estate better than anyone expected, better than Thomas ever did, better than my father even." He grabbed her hands, his grip warm and solid. "This changes everything, Eliza, everything. I know." They stood there, hands clasped, the enormity of what they'd accomplished settling over them like a blanket. "We did this," Victor said quietly. "Together. You and me. Against everyone who said we'd fail. We did." He pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers, and for a moment they just breathed together, savoring the victory. "I couldn't have done it without you," Victor said. "Yes, you could have. You're stubborn enough."
Maybe. But it wouldn't have been as good or as fun. Eliza laughed, the sound surprised and genuine. "Fun? You call fighting with investors and dodging assassination attempts and dealing with your nightmare relatives fun? When I'm doing it with you? Yes." She looked up at him, seeing the man he'd become over the past year, stronger, steadier. The scars were still there, physical and otherwise, but he wore them differently now, not as wounds, but as proof that he'd survived, just like she had. "I love you," she said. The words surprised her as much as they surprised him. Victor's eyes widened. "What?" "I love you." She said it again, louder, more certain, letting the truth of it fill the space between them. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe it was in the river when I decided you were worth saving. Maybe it was in the hut when you handed me the shotgun and said, 'Together.' Maybe it was watching you with the boys, or fighting beside you against your family, or just existing in the same space and realizing I didn't want to exist anywhere else, but it's true. I love you." Victor's face did something complicated, relief and joy and fear all mixed together, like he'd been waiting to hear those words but didn't believe they were possible. "I love you too," he said, the words rushing out. "I have for months. Maybe since that first night when you stood over me with a knife and told me I wasn't allowed to die. I just didn't know if you felt—" Eliza kissed him. It was different from the brief, careful kiss at their wedding. This was real, deep, full of all the things they'd been too scared or too stubborn to say out loud. His hands came up to frame her face, gentle and sure, and she pressed closer, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart against hers. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless. "Well," Victor said, his voice rough. "That's new." "Good new or bad new?" "Very, very good new." Eliza smiled, really smiled, the kind that made her face ache. "Then we're doing it right." "We are." He kissed her again, softer this time. "We really are." Done.
The party to celebrate the railway contract was Eliza's idea. Not a formal ball, she still hated those with a passion, but a gathering for the tenants, the staff, the miners, the people who'd worked alongside them to rebuild the estate from the ashes Thomas had left behind. They set up tables in the gardens, hired musicians from the village, roasted whole pigs and lambs, and opened the wine cellars. The staff protested. It was too informal, too common. What would the gentry think? But Eliza overruled them. The gentry can think whatever they want, she said. This party is for the people who actually matter. It was loud and chaotic and absolutely perfect. Eliza stood on the terrace as the sun set, watching Victor dance with Henry on his shoulders, while Thomas clung to his leg, shrieking with laughter. The boys were almost a year old now, walking and babbling and getting into everything. Victor was grinning, more relaxed than she'd ever seen him, spinning in circles while Henry grabbed his hair and Thomas tried to climb up his trouser leg. Mrs. Brennan appeared beside her, holding 2 glasses of wine. She handed one to Eliza without a word. "To new beginnings," the housekeeper said, raising her glass. Eliza looked at her in surprise. Mrs. Brennan's face was softer than usual, almost warm, the perpetual disapproval replaced by something that might have been respect. "You've done well, my lady," Mrs. Brennan continued. "Better than anyone expected. Better than I expected, and I don't say that lightly." "Is that an apology, Mrs. Brennan?" "It's an acknowledgement." The housekeeper took a sip of wine. "You're not what I thought you'd be when you first arrived, and I'm glad I was wrong." Eliza felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she hadn't realized was there. "Thank you. That means more than you know. Call me Anne." "If we're going to work together for the next 30 years, you might as well." "All right, Anne." They stood in companionable silence, watching the party unfold below them. Tenants dancing with servants, miners sharing drinks with gardeners, children running wild through the flower beds while their parents laughed and didn't try to stop them. "He's good for you," Anne said, nodding toward Victor. "And you're good for him. I wasn't sure at first, thought it was just politics, just strategy. But watching you two together, it's real. We drive each other crazy most days. That's how you know it's real. The easy relationships don't last. It's the ones where you have to work for it, fight for it, choose it every day. Those are the ones that matter." Eliza took a sip of wine, letting the words settle. "I suppose they are." Victor caught her eye across the garden and waved, still balancing Henry on his shoulders. Eliza waved back, her heart full in a way she'd never experienced before, like it might burst from the sheer weight of happiness. She'd come so far from the widow in the flooded cottage, from the woman everyone whispered about, pitied, dismissed as damaged goods, from the girl who'd married a drunk because she had no other options and buried him without tears. Now she was Lady Hale, wife, mother, partner in rebuilding an empire that had nearly destroyed itself. And she'd done it by being exactly who she was. Stubborn, fierce, unwilling to bend or break or apologize for taking up space. The world had tried to break her, and she'd broken it back. Victor made his way over to her, the boys still clinging to him like barnacles, and pulled her into the chaos of their embrace. "Dance with me," he said. "I don't dance." "You do now. It's a party, your party. You have to dance." He handed Henry to Anne, who took him with surprising gentleness, scooped up Eliza, and spun her into the crowd of celebrating tenants. She laughed, stumbling over her own feet, holding on to him as they moved to the music. It was clumsy and graceless and absolutely perfect. "I love you," Victor said again, like he couldn't stop saying it now that he'd started, like the words had been building up for months and were finally free. "I love you too. Even when I'm being impossible? Especially then, gives me an excuse to argue." He laughed, the sound rich and warm, and pulled her closer. They danced until the stars came out, until the boys fell asleep in Anne's arms and had to be carried inside, until the last guest had stumbled home happy and full, until the musicians packed up their instruments and the gardens were quiet again except for the chirping of crickets. And when they finally walked back to the house, hand in hand, Eliza looked up at the stone walls and the lit windows and realized something that felt like truth settling into her bones. This was home. Not because it was grand or beautiful or filled with 300 years of history, not because of the title or the money or the power that came with the Hale name, but because it was theirs, built on choices made in impossible moments, on courage when it would have been easier to run, on the stubborn refusal to let the world decide who they were supposed to be. They'd survived the storm, the flood, the knives in the dark, the enemies in their own family, the whispers and the doubt and the 100 small deaths that came with being different, with choosing a path no one else understood, and they'd come out the other side stronger, together. Victor squeezed her hand as they climbed the stairs to their bedroom. "What are you thinking about?" Eliza smiled. "That we're going to be all right, more than all right." "Just all right? That's setting the bar pretty low." "Better than all right, then. We're going to be extraordinary." Victor pulled her close, kissing the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair. "We already are." And standing there in the hallway of the house that had become home, with their sons sleeping peacefully upstairs and the future stretching out before them like an open road, Eliza believed it. They'd rewritten the rules, rebuilt the family from scattered pieces, proved that strength didn't come from bloodlines or titles or the approval of people who'd never risked anything themselves. It came from the choices you made when everything was falling apart. From the moment you decided to jump into freezing water instead of watching from the safety of the shore. From the word together spoken in the face of impossible odds. And theirs was a story that would last, not because it was easy, not because they were perfect, but because it was true. Built in mud and blood and the kind of love that survives when everything else burns away.